Let's kickstart the show then and talk about our topic for today, planning for your child's education. Now, education is the cornerstone of a child's future. As parents, you strive to provide the best educational experience for your children, nurturing their growth and unlocking their full potential. Today, we delve into the vital topic of planning for your child's education, exploring the strategies and considerations that pave the way for their academic success. Joining us on the show today is Shweta Rajani, Head of Mutual Funds at Anand Rathi Wealth Limited. Shweta, hi, and thanks so much for taking the time out and joining us on the show today. Let me start with the questions, and can you outline the key financial considerations that parents should keep in mind when planning for their children's education in India?
Hi, thank you for having me on the show. You've brought up an important topic of children's education, and more so if you're planning children's education abroad. Then, I would say there are 3 to 4 key points that a parent should keep in mind. One is, roughly determine the location where you're going to send your child for education. It could be, US, UK, and understand what is the inflation there, inflation in terms of the tuition fee, inflation in terms of the travel cost. There could be seasonality, inflation that you have to keep in mind, because that will help you ascertain that the rate of return that you would want on the money you're investing, how much should it be? So that's one, right? The inflation. Second, currency depreciation. So, keep that into mind as well. So I'll just give you certain rough numbers here. If you're expecting the inflation to be at around 8%, and then you also have to keep in mind, let's say a rupee depreciating by around 3 odd percent, you know that when you're starting to plan, whatever you are investing has to grow at upwards of 12%. So this will help you, strategize how you should invest. So, these are two key factors. Apart from that, you also have to keep in mind what possibly, could be an emergency fund that would be needed over and above the basic cost of education that would be needed. And fourthly, when do you start? The earlier you start, the better it is. But then I would say if you're planning to send your child or when he or she is 18 or 20 years, then you need to plan at least 10 years in advance. Of course, if you can do it before that, the better it would be. But I would, primarily list down as these 4 factors you should keep in mind.
All right, well, thanks for that. Now, with the rising cost of tuition and living expenses overseas, what are some effective strategies that parents can employ to start saving and investing early? What are some instruments that they can start investing their money in?
Sure. So, like I was mentioning, understanding how much would be the cost becomes the start point. So, whenever you're planning for your children's education, the first thing that you have to keep in mind is set your goal, which means, like I was just mentioning previously, if you know that I'm going to need 11% of growth rate and I'm going to leave, let's say, a 50 lakh amount, then you can work backwards to say my target is in 10 years, I want to get to a value of 50 lakhs. And for that, I need to have a 14% rate of return or a 12% rate of return. It will help you to know how much investments you need to make every month. So setting your goal becomes very important. Second, have your budgeting for the month, because then you know what is your income and what is the saving level you need purely for your child's education. And then you would have your other goals for which you need to plan. So that becomes, a second important point. And third one is have a clear strategy in place, which means you need to know how much should go into, equity, debt, and a combination of that. So I would say, let's say if you're having 10 years, then you can possibly have a higher equity allocation. The earlier you start, the better. I'll just give you some math here. If you're targeting, let's say, a 50 lakh or maybe a crore, because you're taking into account all the costs and travel that would be needed, then if you plan 10 years in advance, then you maybe possibly be able to achieve that number with 40,000 per month of SIP. But if you have just 5 years residual and you're planning now, then you may need 1,20,000 crores per month to get to that same 1 crore value. So therefore, setting your goal and budgeting becomes important. And third, have your asset mix strategy in place. Some instruments that you can consider, because you're going to be equity heavy, I would say, go in for mutual funds. That would be best. You'll get professional management as well as, exposure to different market caps without having to bother too much about understanding the market because you have a professional doing it. So these are, 3 points that you should keep in mind.
All right, well, Shweta, thanks so much for taking us through that very informative answer. But also help us understand how important is it for parents to create a diversified investment portfolio that is specifically tailored to their children's education fund, and how do they factor in for some uncertainties like inflation, and how do they beat that? What's a good strategy here?
Yes. So, talking about diversification, one, diversification helps you in enhancing your portfolio return, bringing in consistency to that return. And of course, it works as a good risk management tool for you because, let's say you've invested in 10 funds and one of them is not performing well for you, then the other nine chip in. And that's how, it brings in the brings reduces the volatility for your portfolio. So diversification is very important, and having a good strategy in place becomes important. So here again, what you need to keep in mind is diversify across asset classes. Like if you have 10 years to plan, then you can have 80% of your money invested in equity and 20% of it you can keep in debt. So the debt will help you meet any emergency requirement that comes in, which you had not foreseen. It will also help you navigate few years where equity may end up being volatile. So, that way it will play a key role. So have an 80-20 mix if you have kind of an 8-10 year of horizon or more than that. Diversify within the category. So if you're choosing mutual funds, for example, even within that, you can have a combination of large and mid cap category, a flexi cap fund, a mid cap fund, a small cap fund, because you, like I said, get exposure to different asset market caps. You'll get exposure to different styles of fund management, and all of that will help you get to your goal that you've set of having a certain corpus for your child's education. Will be a very smooth journey for you.
All right, and lastly, could you also provide some practical tips or advice for parents who are just beginning to plan for their children's education, especially if they're feeling overwhelmed by this process? How does one deal with that?
Yes. So I think, here what becomes important is that you identify what could be your source of income, source of funding that education, rather, I would put it this way. And you'll have two, three different sources. Some bit of it you may want to fund from your own investments, but, let's say you've not planned enough for that. Then you would have an alternative of taking an education loan, which is very common. People do go in for an education loan. You also get some tax benefits of doing that. So that is an alternative source. There could be scholarships. So you should understand what is the process to get a scholarship, and what would be the requirement. Lastly, I would also say it's very important to inculcate this habit of letting the children know how they have to earn their own living. So when they actually go abroad, getting a part-time job to fulfill some of their, financial needs would also be helpful. So this is something that one should keep in mind. Second, always have an emergency fund in place because, there could be scenarios where there's a certain medical emergency or there is a sudden shoot up of inflation, therefore, which enhances the cost. So always have an extra buffer of that emergency fund. So these, I would say two practical points that an parent should keep in mind, apart from planning your entire journey of how you take care of your educational requirement. Thirdly, I think, before I miss this point, is ensure that you have your funds, which would be needed in the next 2 years, be in debt or a slightly safer instrument. So as you're nearing your goal, shift your asset allocation. If you started with 80-20 and you know that I'm going to need an X amount after 2 years, that 2 years of funding should be parked separately from debt and not keep it in a volatile asset like equity. So, this would be my three, key practical tips to a parent.
All right, brilliant. And just on a quick note, help us understand that if someone is opting to take an education loan for their child, what are some of the factors in the loan that they should be watching out for? What are some of the things they should make sure that the loan has, or what are some of the important factors that they need to be watching out for?
Yes, so certain things that you should keep in mind when you're taking an education loan is what is the rate of interest that you're getting, and whether it is fixed or variable. Most of it would be fixed, but then just check the terms of what they are saying. What is the repayment schedule, and in case you have to early pay, what could be the opportunities that you would have for that. What would be the transaction cost of entering into a loan? These are, three, four things that you have to keep in mind: the interest rate, fixed variable, transaction cost, and the repayment schedule. Lastly, I think, just keep in mind that you'd also get a tax exemption if you're taking an education loan.
All right, Shweta, thanks so much for that. But viewers, that's the end of our discussion. We hope this was fruitful for you and you have some interesting takeaways from this discussion. With our viewers, we'll slip into a very short break on this edition of The Money Show, where Shweta will be on board with us even when we come back from the break. Shweta, you stay tuned, and viewers, you stay tuned as well, because when we come back, we'll be talking about all your mutual fund queries. So yes, you stay tuned.